Thank you, Mrs. Sprite. Let's take our Bibles tonight and go to Exodus chapter number 3. Exodus chapter 3, and the ushers are going to have some handouts for you. If they would go ahead and come, and we'll give a moment to hand these out. And we don't have slides still, and so we're going to do these handouts. We may continue the handouts anyway, but we will have slides as much as we can. The Cherries are returning. They'll get in almost midnight tonight from their Israel journey. And so we'll endeavor to have some slides. While you're doing that, let me encourage you to get a hold of these. I think we have copies. Miss Chris, do we have copies of these out? Are they in the... You have them. So they've got to see you. You'll put them on the table. These are the box tops, and we've mentioned these before. Mrs. Spry has helped us stay on track with this. And this one is a great, easy way that Canaan Baptist Academy can benefit. All somebody has to do is register. They don't even have to go to a store to buy anything. This one, they just register, and Canaan Baptist gets $10. And the academy, that is. This goes towards the academy. So you can get a sheet, and there's a QR code. So you can have somebody that's over on the other side of the world, and they can register, and they'll be able to contribute $10 to Canaan Baptist Academy. Just call your 100 friends and just say, just scan this, register. You don't ever have to buy anything else. But if you do, save the box top or scan those, and we can benefit from that as well. But this is just easy. And so you want to help Canaan Baptist without having to give out of your pocket. You can have somebody just scan, and they don't have to give anything, but they just simply register, and then Canaan Baptist Church will be earning $10 per person who signs up. And it doesn't have to be one family. It can be everybody in the family can do that, from my understanding. So Miss Chris will have those papers back there, and you can get a hold of those. Last week we started our journey through the Bible, God's plan from beginning to end. We started in Genesis, and tonight we're going to continue on into the book of Exodus. So notice, if you would please, in chapter number 3, we'll read here, starting in verse 7, and you have that text up at the top of your page. But the Bible says, "And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land, and a large unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites." Now go over to chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse number 13. "And Moses said unto the people, Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians, whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." Have you ever felt trapped, stuck? Physically, some experience that feeling of claustrophobia if they feel stuck. But sometimes in a situation, we find ourselves and we may seem stuck in something that's too big to fix, or too big to get out of, or too heavy to carry. That's the Exodus story. That's the story of Exodus. It's not just Israel's story, it's your story. It's mine. You see, Exodus is the book of deliverance. It's the story of God breaking chains and making a way when there was no way. It reminds us that God the God who delivered His people then still delivers His people today. I asked if you've ever been stuck. I was preaching in West Virginia at a camp, and I've been there probably 10 years preaching at the camp at different times, and I've grown accustomed to how the schedule goes. And I fly in on Monday, and I usually rent a car in Pennsylvania, and I drive 2 hours up to Tunnelton, West Virginia. And it's sometimes I wonder, can you even get there from the airport? And GPS always finds us there, and you get there, and I have to make sure it's in my GPS because I get a good number of miles away from the camp, and there is no GPS signal. It's whatever was downloaded into my phone that gets me there. And it doesn't matter how long I've preached there, I still need a GPS. I still use a GPS here. I went to the hospital today. I put it in the GPS. Always put it in the GPS. I have no idea about any geographic. I'm thankful. I don't know. I don't have to know the directions to get to heaven. I just have to know the one to get me there. If not, I'm in trouble without a GPS. And so I rented a truck. Christy rented. She does all my plane tickets and rentals, and rented a truck, and knowing we're going to be up in the mountains. And I love preaching at the camp. It's a great camp, great environment. I love the area. It's beautiful. But I have to sometimes go away from camp to get a signal to do some phone calls and other business. And so after I preached twice in the morning for lunch, I tend not to eat lunch whenever I'm preaching. And so I was just going to go towards town and so I can get a signal. And I've been on those roads so many times. They're dirt roads, and the creeks are orange because of all the pollution that's gone into the water from the mining and the different things. And I've just, it's still, even with that, it's just a beautiful area. But I was going down the dirt road in this nice truck, and it's a Toyota. So I knew Brian would love this brand new Toyota truck. It was nice. It was really nice. And you're on these dirt roads, and this tractor was coming, and so I was pulling off to the side and let this tractor come through, and I just pulled over to the grass. All it was just grass. When I pulled it over to the grass, I discovered it wasn't just grass. It was grown over. It was a grown over creek bed. And when I did, the truck went over onto two tires with two tires up in the air. And so I kind of panicked. I felt stuck. And so I did my best to open the door. I climbed out the top, and I shimmied over the rail of the step bed to get over, drop down. I'm looking at the underside of this rental pickup truck, and two tires are in the air, and then this West Virginian, he gets out of his tractor and he said, "I was telling you no." And I said, "Well, you didn't tell me no clear enough, that's for sure." And he was waving behind his plexiglass that I couldn't see any waving. And not that would have mattered. It would have been just like looking at sign language. I would have just probably waved back at him, not knowing what he was referring to. But he said, "You're in a mess." And I said, "Yeah, I am." So I said, "What are you going to do about it?" And he said, "It's not my mess." And I said, "Well, what can you do about it?" He said, "I don't know what we can do." And he said, "I don't even have anything to pull you out with." And so I began to talk with him, try to figure out where I'm going to go. I said, "How much further exactly is it before I can get signal?" He said, "Oh, it's only right around the corner." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard that kind of a direction before." I said, "How far around the corner?" He said, "Just about 4 miles. And I thought, well, that's not going to go over so well, because by the time I get there, I'm going to miss the service. And so people would come by, and I'd ask, "Is there a way you can get me out?" "Well, no. Let me go back and see if we can get the mule." And I was like, "Well, get the mule, whatever." And one guy was saying, "It'll take me a little bit to hitch her up." And I thought he was just using proverbial language referring to his gator mule. No, he was really talking about his mule with 2 floppy ears. And then he said, "Well, I loaned her out to somebody, and so that won't work." Then somebody finally came by and said, I've got signal on my phone if you would like to make a call. I said, yes. So I called up to the camp, and with barely a signal, I was telling the camp director, hey, I'm in a ditch. And he said, where are you? Well, I can't even answer Captain if he were to say, where are you in Covington? I say, you know where the Starbucks is. If you go right there, that's about where I am. I don't know. I don't know the street names that well. And so there, I just told him, you remember where the house that you said caught on fire 100 years ago is still standing? He said, yes. Are you there? I said, no. I went right there, and I went down a little ways, and I went left. He said, I know where you are. And he came up in his mule, but it had 4 wheels on it. And he came up, and I said, there is no way we're going to be able to get this out. And he said, no, we will. And so he hooked up his cable to it, pulled it right out. No damage or anything. And I tell you, I was relieved. I had such relief. He said, before we pull it out, he said, can I do one thing? I thought he was going to say, can we pray? And he said, can I take a picture? He said, it's my ride. And I said, sure. And so he took a picture, and somewhere there's a picture floating around still today. But I felt stuck. I felt terribly stuck. I felt more, not that we couldn't get it out. I was just thinking, what is this going to do to the insurance? What am I going to have to buy this truck? And I wasn't planning to buy the Toyota truck. No, I wouldn't have minded it, but I just wasn't planning on it. But I felt stuck. Imagine being stranded, and not just stuck, but stranded. Stranded in the middle of an ocean with no boat, no way back to shore. See, all of this is how the Israelites felt. They were in bondage. They were stuck. They were stranded. But God parted the waters. And God still parts waters today in your life and in mine. G. Campbell Morgan called Exodus, it's the book of redemption by blood and by power. J. Vernon McGee said Exodus is the story of God bringing His people out that He might bring them in. Now, the book of Exodus is not only history itself, as we find God's people being delineated, but it's the blueprint for how God delivers us from sin. It's the blueprint for how God delivers from suffering and from our own selves. Exodus is the second book of the 5 that Moses penned. And what are those 5 books called? Do you remember? Pentateuch. And since this book tells us about Israel's bondage in Egypt and their deliverance by God through Moses, it was named Exodus. Exodus means going out or exit. It is the record of God's deliverance of His people, Israel, from the Egyptian bondage. So the key word in Exodus, well, you remember the key word in Genesis. What is it? Say it again. Beginnings. Yeah, it's begin. That's the word Genesis that they named, and this would be typical, that they would use some words that have meaning. Genesis was the beginning. And the interesting thing about Genesis is it's not an explanation book as much. It's not a why as much as it's a declaration book. You find it in the very first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, how did He do all that? Well, He just spoke it. Well, but how? He just did it. It's just one of those you just declare. There are some guns that are around. The staff have guns, and Brother Baker has guns, and different guys have guns. They'll take them out. We'll shoot them sometimes, and I don't know what guns what. I don't even know how it works, but I do know when they've got the safety off, pull the trigger, it works, and you just fire it. And that's what God does in that very first book. He's just firing who He is and what He can do. The explanation's not always there, but it is the story of the beginnings and the foundations of a lot of things. Well, if Genesis is the beginning, then the key word in Exodus is redemption. Redemption. See, Exodus is a continuation of the book of Genesis because in Hebrew it begins with the word and. And so if we were to look at it in Hebrew, it's picking up where Genesis left off and it's that continuation. And the book of Exodus, it presents basic information about the growth of the Hebrew nation that we were introduced to in the book of Genesis, the Hebrew nation from the family of Jacob. So it left off basically with Jacob, and we're picking back up with this nation. And by the way, just a side note, in chapter 1 and verse 5 and chapter 12 and verse 37, you can find the numerical growth of Jacob's family during their stay in Egypt. And so it's Genesis ending with Jacob and Exodus picking right up. Now, I want you to see the outline. And I had a much longer outline, almost 2 pages of outline, and I decided just to go with the simple 3 points here that would help in this outline. You see that actual Exodus, they're exiting from Egypt in chapters 1 through 18. You find the law, emphasis of the law in chapter 19 through chapter 24. And then you find the tabernacle and its emphasis in chapter 25 through 24. And those would be very significant as far as gaining a good perspective of what is taking place here. In Israel's law, I put chapter 25 through 24. That would really go through chapter 40. So if you mark that chapter 25 all the way through chapter 40. And you find, I think, a good, healthy way to dissect the book of Exodus and looking at this. You think about the Exodus in chapters 1 through 18. I'm going to spend a little bit of time, just a little bit here. This will still be fairly brief tonight, but I want us to look at chapter number 1 because this is where you find God's people enslaved. Now, why are they enslaved? Well, it's because a new king comes to the throne in Egypt, and he takes these Jews and he makes them slaves because their population and number was increasing, and he became threatened at these numbers. They're significant. So he thought this will be a threat to us. So not only did he take the Jews and make them slaves, in addition, he ordered the midwives to kill all the Hebrew male babies, and Satan is already at work to destroy the Hebrew race. All right, question. Why would Satan at this point be trying to kill and exterminate the Hebrew race? What's his motivation in doing so? Yeah, it's to stop that promised Redeemer from being born. And so that's why Israel has been the target of Satan. By the way, I believe that there are many times, this is one of them, many occasions in history that you find Satan at work to exterminate the Jewish people and have an antichrist ready. I believe that many times in our history, there may have been a man, there may have been that one, but it wasn't the antichrist. It wasn't time yet. It wasn't God's time. Satan is not the one calling the shots, but Satan has been doing what he can to exterminate and to prevent. And while he has not succeeded when it came to the Redeemer, when he's failed at stopping the Messiah from coming and for making the sacrifice, the once and for all sacrifice, he's still at work to disrupt. He's still at work to deceive, and he's still doing all that he can to damn the souls of people that the Messiah came to seek and to save who were lost. And so here we find Satan has gone to work to destroy the Hebrew race so that the promised Redeemer could not be born. Well, that's in chapter number 1, the enslavement of God's people. Then in chapter 2 and 4, 2 through 4, we see the deliverer. And it seemed like, if you're looking at this, and maybe the people of God thought this, just trying to put myself into their shoes, it seems like God's not doing anything. And had the Hebrews, however, remembered what God had told Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 13. Well, hold your place here and let's go to Genesis chapter 15. Genesis 15 and verse 13. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them, how many years? 400. And so while over in Exodus they become enslaved and hardship comes upon them, they may be thinking that God is up to nothing and He doesn't care. But had they simply remembered what God had told Abraham, they would have known that for 400 years has to elapse. Even though all male Hebrew children were ordered to be killed, we remember the story how God used the heart of Pharaoh's daughter to save His servant Moses. At the age of 40, Moses kills an Egyptian. He has to flee the country. And that's brought up in Acts chapter number 7. Remember in Stephen's message that he preached. While in Midian at the age of 80, Moses was called by God to his people out of Egypt, and that's chapters 3 and 4. Well, the Exodus covers chapters 1 all the way through 18 and 10 mighty, we call them plagues. They're really 10 mighty miracles of God. But we get to chapter 19 and we find here the law is emphasized. Because 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites were at Mount Sinai. Then God made known His purpose in saving them. Why did God save them? Why did God choose them? And why did God save them? At Mount Sinai, He again reminds them. He brings perspective. Doesn't it help sometimes when you're going through trials and situations and even just life itself, and you find revelation, especially when it's divine revelation? This is why I'm going through. This is why I'm here. Well, let's look at chapter 19 and let's find out why and what God told them as to why He saved them after 400 years in Egypt. Notice in chapter 19 and verse number 3. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Why did God choose them? Because He just did. And He did so so that they would be a peculiar treasure unto Him above all people. For the entire earth and all that's in it belongs to Him anyway. And God chose them not to the exclusion of any other people group, but that this group might know Him. This group might experience Him. He put more miracles into this little nation, this little tiny people group of Hebrews. He did more wonders for them so that they in turn could declare to an entire world there is the true and living God, that they too might know Him. And then we come to chapter 25, and there we find the emphasis of the tabernacle. Well, God gave so much to this people group. He gave them all the mighty miracles, but He also gave them some incredible buildings. The tabernacle, the temple, all to this little nation. But the tabernacle, and it was a time in this section of Exodus when God instructed Moses to build a tabernacle and to furnish it according to His exact specifications. This sacred structure became the center of Jewish life for centuries to come. Every part of it was intentional. Every part had spiritual significance and symbolism. Listen, I think if there's anything we can take out of this for us, out of the emphasis on the tabernacle, it's that when it comes to the dwelling place of God, the dwelling place of God today since the inception of the church is His people. And we are the temple of God. And God's people, filled with God and dwelt by God, are commanded to assemble together and is called the church. The church is not a building, though we have buildings. But when we meet, if there's anything I can take away from studying the tabernacle, it's that why should we be less intentional? Why should we be less careful in our meeting together for His name's sake? You can't study the tabernacle. It would, to do justice, we need the picture. And we'll do that. I'll recap this when Brother Cherry gets back, and we can put the picture up. We can walk through the location. We can walk through the furniture. We can walk through every aspect. And it really would be a wonderful series to go through. But you can't read that and study that without understanding God was very intentional about every aspect of the tabernacle. And it makes me scratch my head and wonder, so how do people conclude today that the church doesn't have to be intentional? It doesn't have to be that scriptural. I just was reading a story of a couple who's married, who were talking about their extramarital activities, their open marriage, and their partners outside of one another. And they're discussing that, and they're writing about that, and then talking about their commitment to church. And I'm beginning to think more and more our society is filled, and our mega churches are filled, and our church pews are filled with people who just think checking off a box and coming and sitting and attending is all that it takes. And we don't recognize the intentionality and purpose and structure that God put into the book of Genesis and Exodus and into the church still today. He's given us instruction, and He was very serious, and He told not just what to do, but He also told them why He wanted the tabernacle. Look at chapter 25, In chapter 25, we see him tell why he wanted the tabernacle. Chapter 25, verse 8. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Yeah. Oh, what details were given concerning the tabernacle. Well, something else about the book of Exodus is you see the spiritual types in Exodus. Moses is a picture, it's a type of Christ the deliverer. Egypt in Exodus and is a picture of, well, we've heard this one a lot, of what? The world. Pharaoh is a type, is a picture of Satan. Israel in the book of Exodus is the picture of enslaved man needing redemption. The Passover lamb is a picture of Christ slain. The tree in chapter number 15 of Exodus is a picture of the cross. Manna is a picture of Christ, the source, the sustainer of life. The smitten rock is a picture of Christ crucified and the Holy Spirit being poured out. Amalek is the picture of the flesh in conflict with the Spirit. The tabernacle, the priesthood, is a picture of the person and work of Christ. A lot of pictures and types. I want you to see next, and I should have gotten one of your handouts, so I just make sure I give you, have you gotten all your blanks filled in to this point? No? Can I get one and I'll tell you what they are? Thank you, Matthew. All right, so we're picking up here. This is where we're picking up. Number 2. We're looking at here the God who sees and hears. Exodus is about the God who sees and hears. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people and have heard their cry. Listen, the book of Exodus is a great picture. It's a story, dramatic story, detailed story, and picture of deliverance. And when you and I are in need of deliverance, we get stuck. You got 2 wheels in the ditch, 2 wheels off the ground, and you're in bad shape. You want to know that God hears and He sees. And God says, I have seen and I have heard. Listen, God is not distant. He sees. He's not distant. He hears. He's not distant. He knows. God's aware of the suffering of His people, and He moves to deliver them in the book of Exodus. And He does the same today. Adrian Rogers said the same God who heard the cries of Israel hears your prayers today. David Jeremiah said, Exodus is the story of God moving His people from bondage to blessing. Matthew Henry said, God's compassions are moved by the cry of His afflicted people. Listen, you're never invisible to God. Never. He knows what's afflicting you. He sees you and He hears your cry. So we see there the God who sees and hears. And the next one, number 3, the God who delivers. God who delivers. He tells us, I am come down to deliver them. You see, God delivers by His mighty hand. God's greatest act of deliverance, ultimate one. We find the 9 mighty miracles, plagues. But the ultimate one was the Passover by the blood of the Lamb. God made a way through the Red Sea. You see, Exodus is God rescuing His people, not because they deserved it, but because God loved them. Exodus displays God's sovereign power over nature, over nations, and His own people. John Phillips said, the great theme of Exodus is redemption by blood and by power. Henry Blackaby said, God reveals himself as deliverer, not merely to free, but to bring his people to himself. God doesn't just want you to get out of trouble. He wants to bring you into a relationship. And this is your blank on that first page, the last one. Deliverance is not an escape. It's an invitation. So often people are just looking for escape. Escape from hell. Escape from uncomfortable. Escape. But God's bringing a delivering work to offer the invitation to himself. And then, number 4, we see the God who dwells with his people. We see the God who sees and hears, the God who delivers, the God who dwells with his people. Exodus 25 and verse 8, we read the verse, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Just think, whatever you may have thought as to why God saved you. Well, he couldn't help but save me. He promised he would. And as a kid, I cried out to him. No, I'm telling you, God saved you specifically. And if you were the only one, he saved you so that he could dwell with you. He wasn't lonely. God wasn't trying to find somebody to be his friend. He's God. His very nature is goodness. And he was out of his goodness and love, he was wanting to deliver so that he could dwell. Exodus does not end at the Red Sea. It ends, the book of Exodus, it ends at the tabernacle because the purpose of deliverance is relationship. Why do you think we're emphasizing discipleship all the time? Why is it so many have walked away who, when the pressure has been placed upon them to get in or get out, they chose get out because they did not want relationship. God only delivers his people so that there can be a relationship. And what does relationship lead to? Relationship always in the Bible leads to worship. You see, people will flock to a worship service somewhere, and they will even have churches that will accommodate the time. If you don't want to come for standard, traditional 11 o'clock, you can come at 8:30. And you still have time to get to the lake. I want to tell you, that's not worship because that's not based upon relationship. And it makes me question whether or not there was ever actually redemption in the first place. God's deliverance leads to relationship. And it's relationship that leads to worship. God brought them out. Why? So he could bring them in. The tabernacle wasn't man reaching for God. It was God's demonstration of moving in. The tabernacle teaches us that God desires to be present with his people. Warren Wiersbe wrote, Exodus begins with groaning and it ends with glory. It begins with bondage and it ends with blessing. Jerry Vine said, Exodus is a pattern of how God brings us out of slavery to sin and into freedom in Christ. Sidlow Baxter, preacher of another century, said in Exodus, we see God's mighty hand and his merciful heart. Irving Jensen said, Exodus moves us from chains to covenant and from bondage to belonging. Listen, God doesn't just deliver you so that he would leave you. He delivers you to dwell with you. Why do you think we do the Renew series and we had the Conquer series and the whole discipleship? It's because we want people to find deliverance. Why? So that they could find dwelling with God. He desires fellowship, not just so that you can have freedom. There are many people who have entered into marriage relationships simply because they wanted out of the house. They were looking for freedom, and they wondered why the marriage didn't either work out or why it had no life and joy to it, because they didn't realize that freedom wasn't the answer. It was relationship that was the answer. And God never delivers just to give freedom. He delivers so that you and I could have a better opportunity at experiencing a relationship with Him. Main point is that Exodus reveals that God is the deliverer who rescues His people by grace and brings them into a relationship with Himself. Trust God to deliver you. You find yourself in a situation tonight, you need deliverance, trust God to deliver you, not only from your circumstance, but trust God to deliver you into a deeper relationship with Him. Looking at your blanks here, Exodus ends not with escape, but with invitation. God doesn't just want to deliver you. He wants to dwell with you. And the main point, God delivers His people by grace and brings them into a relationship with Himself. You could just say relationship with Himself. Looking at this, why does this matter? Why does this even matter? If you only want God to get you out of trouble, you will miss the whole point. You'll miss the point of Exodus. You'll miss the whole point of God's working and dealings. If you only want God to get you out of trouble, God wants to deliver you because He wants to bring you into His presence. That's one of the hard things when people are asking for help. Because so often we've seen people only looking to get out of trouble. While the trouble may seem very much an impossible scenario with them and it's a stuck situation with them, what we see is why God has allowed it. Whether or not it's a difficult situation or whether or not there have been some adverse circumstances or some unkind things that have happened to them, that's not the point. But what we're seeing is God allows things in their life and in your life and my life. And if we're not careful, we only want the deliverance out of trouble, and we don't see, or we fail to see and experience that God wants deliverance ultimately for invitation to bring us into His presence. Every deliverance in Exodus, every deliverance, it leads to revelation of who God is, revelation as to what God is up to, which leads to relationship with God, which leads to a response on our part. See, sometimes I would preach in earlier years and I would scratch my head, why in the world are they not getting it? Well, it's because they haven't yet seen God. They've not met with God. That's why we put such an emphasis upon meet God. Spend time with God. An hour with God, is that too much? Christ said, could you not watch and pray with me 1 hour? And I've actually had preachers say, 1 hour? Jesus is the one who said, 1 hour? 1 hour's too much? Do you not know what's on the other side of that 1 hour? Peter, James, and John? The reason why people aren't responding is because they've not seen God. And because they've not seen God, they don't have a relationship with God. And don't misunderstand, the Pharisees knew more Bible than I think even I may know. They had so much memorized and they were so disciplined in it. And it's not what they knew, it's not what they've learned that God tests them on. It's what they live. And there are many people who will still go into the discipleship class and go through discipleship mentality by saying things like this. Oh, I know it all. I've been through all this. I know it. Yeah, I don't really care whether you know it or not. My concern is, when are you going to start living it? The whole point of it is that you would live it. Every deliverance in Exodus, it would lead to a revelation, which would lead to relationship, which would lead to a response. And let me say, God is still on the rescuing, delivering ministry today. He's still into the rescuing people and delivering people, not just to save people from something, but to draw us to Himself. Let me give you this structure of the book of Exodus. If you want to jot this down. I gave you the outline, but let me give you this structure reminder. Chapters 1 through 12 was about bondage. And you can read it and you can see all kinds of things as to, I think I've thought those things before. Like, for example, in Exodus chapter 5, I believe it was, whenever the people of Israel, they're slaves at this time, and Moses had come to them and said, God's going to deliver us. Moses and Aaron had met together, and God has told us He's going to deliver us. And He got the people together and they had a big time of celebration and they rejoiced, celebrated. And then what happens is they go to Pharaoh and they say, Pharaoh, God said, let my people go. You remember the story? And Pharaoh said, I don't know your God and I ain't letting your people go. And he not just said, go back to work, but he heaped upon them even more. More work, knowing that they're not going to get it done, gave them less straw for making brick, and gave them greater punishment for not getting it done. In other words, He made it so hard, and they were whipped, so much so that they came to, the Hebrew men came to Moses and said, we had it better before you told us of what God was doing. We were not beat as much before as we are now. It's worse now that we heard that God heard and God is doing something. See, isn't that just like Satan? After we have a revival meeting, after you have a time with God and you know that God met with you, God heard your prayer, God communicated truth, and you get excited about it. And after that, what happens? The bottom falls out. It happens with young people going to camp. They go to camp, they hear God, they make a decision, and they come back and there's always somebody to say, it's not going to last, it's not going to work, it wasn't real. And it gets worse, it gets harder. And they thought, man, it was easy to stand for God at camp when everybody's standing for God. It's easy to sing when everybody's singing. It's easy to go forward. Listen, and sometimes the only time young people ever go forward at an invitation is at camp. Why? Because when they come back home, it gets hard. I'm telling you, that's just one out of the many chapters you can go through, and you can find all kinds of similar situations that happens when there's bondage. Chapters 13 through 18, you want to write this down, it's about deliverance. Chapters 1 through 12 is bondage. Chapters 13 through 18 is deliverance. And then chapters 19 through 40 is covenant and worship. Covenant meaning God saying, I'm going to be your God. I'm going to dwell with you. I'm still going to take care of you. And about worshiping. See, this is the gospel in picture form, the book of Exodus. It's freedom through the blood of the Lamb, and it's relationship with the living God. They fell into the trap too of saying past tense deliverance, and they found themselves needing present tense deliverance. Don't ever let your salvation be past tense. You say, well, shouldn't it be in the past? Let me say it this way. Don't ever let your marriage be past tense if you're still married. You're not tracking with me, are you? You getting it? If the happiest day of your marriage was before you met one another, you're in bad shape. If the happiest day was the day you said, I do, you're in bad. I want to say, thank God He saved me. And I say, thank God too. But what can we thank God about the saving? Where has He delivered you from your bad attitude? Where has He delivered you from your strongholds in your thinking? Where has He delivered you in the thieving and the robbery from God in giving? In other words, there should be present tense delivering. He's a present tense God. He's a present tense deliverer. And He's always wanting to deliver His people. Why? Because when He delivers His people still today, He's bringing us into a deeper relationship with Himself. The God who delivered Israel is still the God who delivers today. Let's stand together, please.